Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Karen Ware Jackson. I'm the webinar coordinator for PRC, Practical Resources for Churches. We're a nonprofit ecumenical resource center offering resources, consultants, workshops, and webinars to congregations and individuals. We're able to offer these fantastic webinars for free thanks to the generous support of our member subscribers. So you can see on your screen a list of the subscribing judicatories. These are regional governing bodies that subscribe for all of the churches that they represent. So if you are a member of one of these groups, please thank your staff for their support of PRC and make sure you're utilizing all that we have to offer. If you could, but you can also join as an individual or as a ministry. And when you join as an individual or a ministry, you have access not only to our free webinars. Guess what? Everybody has access to those. You have and our free online resource center, another place where everyone have access. You have access to our consultants. We are here at PRC. We say everyone has a calling, and ours is helping you. So that means if you have a question from QuickBooks to copyrights to curriculum, you can call us or email us, and we'll help you out. Another thing we are doing have started recently are special online cohort groups that are meeting to do various things. We have a couple for Christian educators right now. We're working on one that we hope to be starting soon on personal finance. We have one coming up potentially with Katan on transformational leadership for the church. And as a member of PRC, you can join one of these great groups and really engage in your learning and in your leadership of your church and your congregation. Many of you know about our webinars. I want to make sure you are aware of a few that we have coming up that may be of specific interest to the folks in this group. Oops. Sorry about that. My Dropbox just went away, but I want to make sure you know we have one coming up with Ann Cansfield in September. I believe it's September. There we go. September 13th. It's on a Tuesday night. She is an author of the book Be the Brave One, which is a fantastic book, and you might want to join that. We also have a webinar coming up on Thursday, October 13th with Shawnee McElwin on practical ways to confront racism. So we have lots more webinars. Those are a few that I thought might be of interest to this group in particular, and I'm going to post a link to those in the chat. So even if you're watching this late, you can still register and watch any of those recordings. I'm also going to put some links to PRC and ways that you might learn how to support more and connect with us. So those are in the webinar now. But you are here to learn about Parenting for a Better World, which is a fantastic new book. We have the editors here, Susanna Snyder and Dr. Eleanor Marshall. Susanna is academic dean and lecturer in theology and ethics at Ripon College in Cuddesdon, the UK. As well as being a mom to a 4-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son, she is an Anglican priest and has written numerous essays and books on social justice, refugees, migration, and theology. Dr. Eleanor Marshall is the professor of Christian ethics and conflict transformation at Candler School of Theology and in the Graduate Division of Religion at Emory University. She focuses on contemporary Christian ethics with particular attention to violence, peace building, conflict transformation, gender, and moral agency. She has authored 3 books, including An Introduction to Christian Ethics, Conflict, Faith, and Human Life, and Parenting for a Better World is her 3rd edited volume. Susie, Ellen, welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. We're really grateful for the invitation to be here, and grateful to those of you who are attending. One of the things we're most excited about with this book is the chance to talk with other parents about the way they experience the struggles that we're wrestling with here. And so I hope we can do some form of that toward the end of the hour. But we're really grateful that you're here joining, and we really hope that this book and the resources around it are of help to people. So let me just give you a sense of how we thought we'd organize our time. And then I'll talk for a bit, then I'll pass it to Susie, and then we'll go back and forth in our boxes with you a little. We wanted to begin by giving you a sense for the motivations for the book, sort of what launched it for us, what the motivations, our intentions, and kind of our hopes for the book are. And then we thought we'd give you just a kind of high level overview. Although we have 13 chapters and they each have their own discrete content, we also intentionally structured the book with some common features in each chapter so that it would cohere. Sometimes you pick up an edited volume that's lovely in all kinds of ways, but the chapters don't really talk to one another necessarily. And we really hoped to avoid that and have a book that feels like a coherent experience of very different experiences in one book. So we want to give you a sense of that overarching structure. And then Susie and I thought that we would each tell you about 2 chapters in particular. So give you kind of a deep dive succinctly, but a little bit more substantively about 4 chapters total. I'll do 2 and Susie will do 2. And then we have a quick list of takeaways that we hope people get out of the book, and we wanted to name those for you. And then the last thing we'll do is to give you some suggestions for how you can use the book as an individual or a group. We have a brand new discussion guide for this book that we're very excited about. And so it's now up on the website, and we'll make sure that you have a link to that. So let me just kick things off with a little bit about the motivations behind the book. You always sort of hate to assume that your experience is everybody's experience. I know it's not. And also, I think there are things that are common in the motivations behind this book that might be common to you or familiar to you. And one of the ways that we've been talking about this is the struggle in parenting to answer the call and to answer the calls. Like, how do we respond to our sense as individuals of a calling, a vocation toward social justice, toward love of neighbor, toward community engagement, toward sustainable practices? How do we answer those kinds of calls from God and also juggle the many calls of the day? And not just juggle them, but how do we really remain present as parents while also responding to this call for a thoroughly engaged life of service and work for justice? So this is something that Susie and I have talked about quite a bit. We've been friends for a long time now, about 14 years, and we've been parents more recently together. My kids are a little bit older than Susie's, but we've been in conversation about these things for a while. And like many things related to COVID, this question became sort of more pressing during the lockdown of COVID, when we were trying to both hold it together, remain fully present as parents now 24/7 in our houses with our kids, and also engage the work of social justice and our broader callings and vocation. So during COVID, we reconnected actually through Zoom like this, and we began talking about what it would look like to provide a resource for other parents to reflect on this kind of struggle of parenting and social justice work together, and who we might invite to think with us about it. And we created a kind of dream team of people that we know or know of who seem to us to do both of these things well, or at least they are equally struggling and very articulate in their ability to sort of convey the experience and then reflect theologically on it. So we reached out to colleagues and friends and people we knew of and invited them to participate in this book project with us. And what's remarkable is that even in the lockdown of COVID and the busyness of our lives, they said yes, that they would also love to be a part of this project. So we met together in Zoom as a group, the contributors, sort of several times. We read each other's chapters. And what's emerged is, I think, and really hope, a book that is practical in nature. As Susie will say in a minute, each chapter ends with a try it out section. So a list of very practical things that parents could try and kind of experiment with. So it's a practical book. It's an honest book. It's a book that does not make big claims about, you can do it all and you can do it all perfectly. It's none of that. It's honest. It's also a book that we hope is encouraging and inspiring to people. At the minimum, it reminds you that you're not alone with these struggles, but then it also offers some reassuring words that small things matter, that things will be okay, that there are others who are also in this struggle with you. So that's a little bit of the background and what we hope that the book is conveying to the readers. So Susie, I'm going to toss it your way and let you give us a kind of overview of the organization of the book.
Thanks, Ellen, and it's great to be here with you all. I'm joining from the UK. So as Ellen's mentioned, the book has 13 chapters, and each of the chapters is written by a different author, and each chapter discusses a different practice. And rather than deciding to organise our book by a particular issue or injustice, so say having a chapter on responding to racism, and then a chapter on responding to sexism, and a chapter on responding to classism, we thought it might actually be more helpful to parents, more practical, if you like, if we brought the practices to the fore. So each sort of the practices in the foreground, and obviously all the issues that we grapple with, and there are so many and they're all interconnected, are very much present, but they're woven in to the text, to the texture, if you like, of the book, with the practices in the foreground. Well, the 13 authors are all from the US, the UK and Canada. Why may you ask that? Because their contexts that are, of course, are very different in all sorts of ways. Well, as Ellen and I were reflecting, and I lived in the US for 5 years, and a lot of us have experience of living in different contexts and different cultures. We reflected that these three contexts in particular share similar colonial pasts and imperialist tendencies in the present. That they're places at the moment that are seeing the growth of political division and the growth of far-right politics. And we're all sort of advanced neoliberal capitalist consumer economies. So while there are some really significant differences, there are also some similarities that we share across these three contexts that we thought would be really interesting to have some conversation across. What's more, if you think about churches in these three contexts, we're all facing similar kinds of challenges, from numeric and financial decline to splits between those who identify as evangelical or conservative and those who identify as liberal and progressive. And we've also, as churches, all got histories of racism and classism and so on. So there seems to be some really fruitful ground for discussion across our contexts. But perhaps that's where the similarities in our authors' contexts end. We're also all very different. We inhabit different kinds of family life and structures. Some of us are single parents, some of us live in dual parent households, some of us have adopted children, some biological. We've got different ages and stages and numbers of children. We identify as coming from different racial and ethnic backgrounds. We have different sexual and gender identities. We belong to different Christian denominations. We identify as belonging to different classes. So we're really very diverse, despite sharing this kind of broad context of being in the UK, the US and Canada. But what we do, and I think Ellen alluded to that at the beginning, is we try to sort of offer some coherence in the book by all following broadly the same structure. And of course, because we're all different, we work that out in different ways. But each author weaves together, if you like, similar threads. We each share a particular struggle that we've had. So I'll give you an example. Mine is, how on earth do we begin to respond to the huge challenge of climate change while parenting 2 young children. Others respond to other particular challenges that have been pressing or particularly prescient for them at this stage of their lives. And then we each talk about one practice, occasionally two, but mostly one practice that we use to engage with this struggle in the course of our family life. So something often that we do with our children, sometimes that we do alongside our children, or a practice that can fit in with the complexities and pressures of family life. Each of us offers some theological exploration of the practice, and often that involves drawing on scriptural passages or theological themes or biblical stories to understand how we can understand this practice theologically, what its roots might be, what God's call in this practice might be. And then, as Ellen suggested, at the end of the chapter, we most concretely offer a try it out section. And this offers, again, it varies a little bit because we all wanted to do it a little bit differently, but either step-by-step instructions about how to try out the practice if it's not something that you've done before, or sometimes it's just hints and tips on how readers might think about going about the practice themselves. And these try it out sections aren't supposed to be blueprints for action, as if we somehow got it all sorted and we've conquered a practice that we're sharing with the world because it's fabulous. But it's a sharing rather of some of our own ideas, our struggles, things that have worked well for us in particular moments and phases of our parenting lives, and also some of the mistakes that we've made. So some of these hints and tips come from sort of well-worn or well-trodden roads where things have gone wrong. So I hope that gives you a rough overview of how we've structured the book, who's contributing to it, and some of the kinds of discussion, theological and practical, that you might find. So back to you, Ellen.
Thanks, Susie. So we wanted to give you a sense of at least 4 chapters, just a succinct but slightly deeper dive into them, but we also wanted to just sort of show you the table of contents. So here we've got, and we should be clear that these aren't random pictures that you're looking at. These are our contributors and their families, so that you can at least see the people who've written these pages. So this is the first half of the book. The slides here is sort of the first half, and then the second half. Let me just advance it, and then I'll come back a minute. So you have a sense of some of the variety. I just want to show you one thing while we're just looking at the table of contents, and that is that we have, while all of the chapters are drawing on our experiences with our children, there are 3 chapters that are also written with children. And so number 12 here is Keith Hebden writing with one of his daughters, Martha, and he integrates into his chapters bits of conversation that they've had about the work and experiences of community organizing. I co-authored with my oldest daughter, who's Catherine, and she was 17 when we were writing this together. And then we also have, let me go back, Carlton. So the Give Backpacks here with Carlton Mackey and Isaiah Mackey, and that's a father-son team. And they're sharing a project that they have done together that involves carrying what they call Give Backpacks. They're Ziploc bags that contain a bottle of water, a pair of socks, some kind of nutrition bar, sometimes $1 or $2. And what Isaiah does is to use his allowance or money that he's earned to buy the supplies for these, assemble the packs, and then they keep them in their car. And as they're driving around to town, if there's somebody on the sidewalk who needs some help, they'll pull up beside them and Isaiah will hand a Give Backpack out. So they tell the story of that practice and reflect on it. So the 2 chapters I'm going to share, and let's see, I guess, Susie, I'll sort of go to them and then we can come back. to yours, I want to tell you a little bit about chapter 8, which is by Anton Flores Masonette, and then chapter 9, Street Protesting and Self-Esteem by Leah Gunning Francis. So Anton Flores Masonette is the founder of a hospitality community here in Atlanta, Georgia, where I live, and it's associated with the Quaker, the Friends meeting, Atlanta Friends meeting, which is in Decatur, which is sort of Decatorites would say it's definitely not part of Atlanta, but these two cities have kind of blended together by now. But Casa Alterna is a ministry of hospitality. It's a place that provides accompaniment and assistance at no cost to individuals and families who are fighting for asylum and against deportation. And Anton has been involved in this kind of work of sort of border crossing hospitality and solidarity with people seeking asylum. He's been doing this work for decades, and this work has really shaped his family. And much of his chapter is about communicating that, the way in which his family has been shaped, quite literally, through this work of hospitality. And so he draws on that experience to help all of us think about how we can not only involve our children in acts of service, but how we can help our children grow in their relationship with people that we seek to serve. So he builds his chapter around the passage from Exodus 3:7. Surely I have seen the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry of distress. I know their sufferings. And for each of these sort of phrases, Anton offers some reflections on the work of helping our children listen to those who are suffering and also enter into relationship with them. So he tells some stories of moments between his children and people they've been in solidarity and community with, as well as moments that he's had as a parent. His try it out section, just to give you a sense of how sort of what these are like and how practical they are, is that he describes a process of not only bringing our children to, say, serve at a soup kitchen, which is a very good activity, it's a good and important thing to do, he's inviting us to think about what it would mean to go to a place where food is served to those on the margins and to sit down at the table and enjoy a meal together, and what that kind of shift might do in the way that our children understand people in need as also people in relationship, right? What that experience might be. So I just thought I would read part of what he does is he describes how parents might do this, and then he gives us some questions to think about on the way home. And I just thought I would share these questions so you have a sense of what Anton is inviting us to do. So he says, on the journey home, explore with your child what this reverse pilgrimage, that's what he's, the language that he's using, has meant to them, using these questions. What did your eyes see that inspired or confused you today? How do you think God saw that? What is something our meal companion shared that most affected you? What do you think breaks the heart of God in what we experienced today? What of what we experienced today fills God's heart with love? Now, what is God inviting us to do in response? So it's a lovely chapter because he's not only helping us sort of think concretely of how we might do things, but also how we might process an experience with our children. It's great. The next one I want to share is Leah Gunning Francis's chapter. And Leah is someone you might be familiar with because she's written two really wonderful and powerful books in reflection on the role that ministers and church people and community organizers played together after and during the racial justice work in Ferguson after the killing of Mike Brown. So Leah is the author of Ferguson and Faith After Ferguson. She's now the dean of the faculty at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, and she's the mother of two teenage sons. So what she does in her chapter is to take us deeply into the beauty and the challenge of parenting Black teenage boys in a society like ours that is so prone to see them as threat and criminal. She writes about the work of parenting and faith as that of pushing against these societal stereotypes and affirming her sons as created in the image of God. So I'm just going to give you a quote from her reflections here so you can see some of the things that she's pulling together. She says, to see themselves as young, gifted, and Black is to see themselves as full human beings created in the image of God, and not as the prescribed stereotypes promulgated by racist ideologies. She then shares her experience of protesting with her sons, watching them move into leadership roles during the protest, and watching them also just enjoy the energy of the protest, the music, the movement, the chants of the protest. So Leah's Try It Out section gives tips for parents on how to involve their children in street protest, and also how to help them process their experiences, similar kind of thing. And throughout all of this, her chapter draws on the story of Esther and invites us to really think about risk, right? To invite parents, families to engage in this kind of risky engagement with our children for the sake of social justice, and also for the sake of empowering our kids with a kind of hope for change. Susie, I'm going to pass it back to you for 2 more descriptions.
Thanks, Ellen. And it was so hard for us to choose which 4 chapters we were going to focus on because they're all so rich. I'm going to talk about 2 in a minute, but Brian's talks about just waiting on our family members is a really rich practice for social justice, and he grapples with what Paul teaches us about this. So there were just so many we wanted to talk about, but I'm going to say a word about Hiram King Cragg's wonderful chapter on praying. I don't know if you can flick back to the previous slide. Hiram is a professor of preaching at Emmanuel College, Victoria University, and the University of Toronto, and she's got 2 children. And she really focuses in her chapter on how we might engage with, pray with, play with the Lord's Prayer as a means of, I guess, cultivating our imaginations towards justice and to deepen our commitment towards justice work. So as part of her chapter, she explores how she taught the Korean version of the prayer to her children at home. They learned the English version at church. And she explores through a number of theologians who grapple with this, a Japanese theologian in particular, replacing the idea of giving us our daily bread with the idea of receiving our daily rice. Because, of course, in certain cultures, rice is the staple and not bread. And she uses this, I guess, as an example, really, not only to talk about how context matters and we need to pay attention to the realities of different people's cultures, and we can help our children and ourselves to do that better through creatively engaging with the Lord's Prayer in this way, but also by encouraging us. And this is the practice she really encourages us to try out, is, well, firstly, to pray the Lord's Prayer and see what strikes us in it, but also to try creatively writing, expanding the Lord's Prayer ourselves as a way of kind of firing our imaginations towards imagining what God's kingdom or kingdom might look like on this earth, because without this imagination of what the world could be as God longs for it to be, we don't have the drive or the hope or if you like, the sense, the calling to know where we're even going. So it's a beautiful chapter, a really evocative chapter, encouraging us to pray and to reflect on how we pray and the language through which we pray, particularly in relation to this very familiar prayer that we may pray with our children every night. if not every night, we probably pray it with them regularly. They hear it at church. So it's through something as simple as reimagining how we engage with that prayer and doing it a bit differently, doing it a bit more intentionally and richly, that we begin to resource ourselves and our imaginations for the work of justice. So I wanted to say a word about that chapter. And the other chapter I'm going to say a word about is on the next slide again. And this chapter is by Don Saliers, who is a distinguished professor of theology and worship, emeritus, and theologian in residence at Cantor School of Theology. So Ellen and I both know Don and have worked with Don. And he's writing about his experience of raising four daughters a number of years ago now in Atlanta. He's in a different season of life, doesn't have children living with him at home. And he talks about two different practices which are actually related, because he sees them both essentially and fundamentally about helping us all to pay better attention. Because we can't work for justice, or at least a core part of working for justice is paying attention to how things really are, as well as to how we want them to be. So what are these practices? Well, the first one he talks about is table talk. And he talks about how every week, and not always at the same time, often on a Sunday, but not always at the same time, he, his wife and four daughters would sit down at the table, and conversations would arise over the mealtime where they all talked together about things that were important to them, things that they'd heard about, whether those were in events in the world, teachings they'd heard at church, or things that were coming up in the girls' lives. And it's such a beautiful chapter and such a thoughtful chapter, because Don talks so richly about how parents learn so much from their children, and that context of talking together was enriching for everybody. So we move away from a sense that somehow parents are imparting the kind of knowledge or the skills about how to engage the world, and a sense that we all learn together and we all grow together. And the second practice he talks about is making music or singing. And his daughters have all been talented musicians, playing different instruments, singing and so on. And he talks about how this playing music together fostered appreciation of one another. It was about learning and appreciating each other's differences. And he really sees that as an important practice that cultivated all of their sense of the importance of justice and their commitment to work for justice in the world, something that's been important in all of their lives. And he really sees these two practices as having helped them all to cultivate the virtues of empathy, courage, generosity, humility, and justice. So again, there's so much more that we could say about these chapters and others, but I'll pass back to Ellen now.
Thanks, Susie. Actually, yeah, Susie was exactly right. It's so hard to just to not talk about all of them. So let me just, I'm not going to go on and on, but I did just want to duck back to say that one of the points that Susie made when she was talking about the variety in the chapters is different ages. And so I think that our youngest one, it comes from Ingrid Rasmussen, who is talking about the experience of singing lullabies to her children, her infants, and the ways in which, just as Hiran is doing something creative with a familiar prayer, Ingrid is thinking creatively about familiar lullabies, and how even the Magnificat can provide us a kind of song of resistance that we might sing as a lullaby to our children. So we do have the Don Saliers is our senior member, and then we have parents of infants as well. So the whole range. And I think it's just a helpful reminder that although the practices that we try out certainly reflect the ages of our children, that at every age, there's a different kind of opportunity to do something creative. So we wanted to give you just again, a kind of sense of what we understand to be the key takeaways from the book. And Susie, I think, is actually going to talk about the first two, and then I'll pop back in for the second two.
Yeah, and I won't take too much time to say these because I think, they can be said quite briefly. I think the first take home that we want to sort of offer is that we recognize and want to affirm that it's really hard to be a parent and to engage fully in the world and to engage with the problems of the world. We're living in tough times. We don't need to rehearse all of the things that are going on in our world right now, but you don't have to glance at news media very often to realize that we're in tough times. So doing this work is hard. And what we want to affirm in this book is that good enough is okay. We're not striving for perfection here, even if we knew what perfection was. But good enough is okay. Something is okay, and it's more than okay. It's good, and it's worthwhile, and it's beautiful. And related to that, something that Ellen and I have just found so reassuring, I think, in reading other contributions as well as writing our own and talking with other parents, is that the small everyday things in our lives matter. The little routine practices that we engage in really matter. Justice is made, lived, known through little things as much as it is through grand gestures, right? So it doesn't have to involve big actions working for justice or loads of extra time, carving out, another day a week or working all night, one night a week to do the work for justice. It's more about how we live our everyday lives, including through our parenting. And I think as we drew the book together, we found that really encouraging and exciting. We're formed, if you like, our characters are formed who we are, and through that our society and our churches are formed through and in the everyday. And most of how we affect the world around us, and through that the world more broadly, takes place through how we spend our time and who we spend that time with, what we buy, the quality of our relationships, the types of conversations we have, the throwaway remarks we make, and so on. And that actually that's really reassuring and heartening and has given us a lot of energy, I think. So we hope that it does you too, or that resonates with you.
Thanks, Susie. A third takeaway for us has been just the reminder, really, that spirituality and social action are not two distinct things, but they are of a piece. So that when we're thinking about the work of social action, sort of out and about in the world, that is deeply connected with how we understand God to be present and moving in the world and in our everyday lives. So the third point is really just a reminder to keep that sense of connection and to communicate that connection to our kids. So I know that often I'll have a sense of living in a very fragmented week, and we'll attend church as a family on Sunday, and then maybe we'll do some kind of action together later in the week. But I have to sort of give it some thought to make sure that my kids and I are remembering that the work that we're doing in terms of faith formation and faith practices and theological reflection and spiritual disciplines, all that is deeply, profoundly connected to every other thing in our lives, including social action. So you'll see in the book, there are as many sort of contemplative practices as there are strategies for social engagement. And that emerged very naturally for us in the work of communicating with the contributors and watching their chapters emerge. And it was kind of a lovely reminder. We didn't have to say, make sure you also talk about meditation or prayer. It just happened, right? Because these things are deeply connected. And it was lovely to see that sort of emerge in the chapters. The last point is really a variation on the point that Susie made so well, that we're not our hope here for this book is not to add to parents' to-do list. It's not about addition. It's not about adding more things to your life. It really is about thinking about the things that you're doing with a little bit more intention and with a goal of integration. So how can you, as you're working in the yard, how can you also make that a time to think with your kids about sustainability in the planet, right? As you are doing these sort of the daily work of parenting, how can you also do that work with more intention and with a way of thinking about it as integrated with your practices of faith, with your calling for social change actions in the world. So the drive is really integration more than addition, adding things. And it's about intention, as Susie said, and not perfection. So let's give you a quick sense of how to use the book, what we think might be useful for people who are picking it up. And then we'll have some time for some questions and conversation. So as Susie said, there are 13 chapters. They're short. They're 10 to 12 pages, and they all end with this try it out section at the end. So they're easy to process. The writing is accessible. We hope that the experiences that are conveyed in the book are varied enough so that readers can both find themselves in the book and encounter an experience that's different from theirs, right? So there's a kind of diversity built into the book, so you don't have to sort of intentionally pull chapters together to create a certain experience for people. You can just sort of move through the book, and the diversity and the variety are already there. So each chapter ends with this try it out section. Part of what we really want to invite people to do is to take their time, not to kind of read it all in one sitting, but to read a chapter, sit with the try it out section, try a variation of what's suggested there, see what works for you and your family, come up with your own sort of practices, take a cue from the theological reflection that's modeled there and try that out as well. But to really think about the book as a resource for experimentation and practice. We also hope that it's a good resource for church groups. So I'm, for example, just now working out the logistics to meet with a group at a church here in Atlanta. And what we're thinking about is meeting a couple times a month, sort of a couple times in October, once in November when things are crazy, once in December, a couple times in January, kind of spreading it out. And we'll do this thing. We'll take 1 or 2 chapters each time and talk about what we learned from the chapter, but also what the parents reading the chapter have been doing creatively on their own. We do have a discussion guide now on the website, and that was created by this really wonderful woman, Amy Lazzaroni. She's a graduate from Candler School of Theology, who I realize very humbly did not put her name on the discussion guide, but she created it and she did a wonderful job. One of the things that she does is to give discussion questions that really capture the central points of the chapter, but I think will be very generative for conversation with a group. And at the end of each list of questions for the chapter, she offers a kind of sending forth. She pulls out a quote that I think, and she chose great quotes for each chapter. I think they really capture the spirit of the chapter and will send you forth into conversation and to practice in kind of a lovely way. Susie, anything we need to say more before we go to see what?
I don't think so, other than to encourage anybody who's here or anybody who engages with this in a book group or a church group to send us an email through the website, because we as the authors have only come up with certain practices. There are so many more wonderful ones out there and rich ones, and we'd love to learn from you, and we'd love to build a huge set of resources and ideas that we can all share together. And if we can use our website to help facilitate that, that would be great.
Terrific. So Karen, should I stop sharing at this point?
Yeah, why don't you take off the share and let's see. I'd love to know what your questions are. Now's a great time to type a question in the chat and let us know what this makes you think about. I can tell you, I also just looked through the study guide or the discussion guide, and I think it looks. I agree. I think it looks really excellent. Something we are always thinking about at PRC is how can we use this resource and how can we equip churches to use this resource. And I think one of the things about parenting is it can be a sort of a lonely experience, even though there's all kinds of others that we even may know doing it in other places. There's so many things that sort of disconnect us or that keep us from talking about our deepest struggles, or that make us feel as if the person in that situation would never understand what I'm dealing with, or we wouldn't have enough in common. And so I think times when parents can get together and discuss something like this are incredibly valuable. Something that I also thought would potentially work is to do something like that online. It can be difficult to get parents together in person, as lovely as it is, and it can be difficult to get us together in person, but then also difficult to convince us that something online is worth our time. But in the realm of just folks trying to do our best. Have you been a part of, either one of you been a part of like a parenting group or had discussions? I mean, it sounds like you had some of them within your group of authors, but
yeah, so we wanted to do this book in a way where we didn't just write our chapters in a silo in our own offices or whatever, or spare bedrooms or whatever at home in COVID, and then kind of never have talked to each other, because actually it felt really important to kind of have the conversation. So we all grouped together to read some of each other's chapters and committed to doing that. So that was really rich. I set up a mum's kind of group once, and interestingly, it was such a rich space and I really loved it. And yet again, one of the challenges that I think you're alluding to, Karen, is just that time is so difficult, and finding an evening where everybody could commit to being out at the same time and making sure that partners or others could help with kids and so on. It's really challenging. So yeah, discussion, finding good spaces for discussion, whether that's in person or online, or perhaps through, checking in through email. Maybe, that might be more realistic for some people to commit to reading a chapter, but then sharing some thoughts over email, so that the last thing we want to do is burden parents with yet another thing they've got to do that they haven't quite done. So
yeah, that's exactly right. This group that I'm trying to set up right now, we're thinking really carefully about childcare for each time. Okay, so if we set the meeting, then let's make sure that there's a childcare option for people as well, which might be good. But I do think, Karen, your point about making use of these Zoom spaces can be really helpful. I was in another group, a church group, during the lockdown year, and when we couldn't do anything but meet in Zoom, and that really opened up. I mean, it's not ideal, I know, but it also made it logistically possible this was an intergenerational group, and so for different reasons, people would have had a hard time getting down to church on a Sunday evening anyway, and so the possibility of all of us convening in this space, well, it just made it possible for people. And I think as imperfect as these things are, I think we've gotten a little bit better at building connections through the boxes in COVID. I think that could be a good option for people.
I always feel like if there is, people feel like there's a reason to show up, whether it's a pre-existing, sometimes people might have pre-existing relationships with one another, even in the same city or sometimes internationally, but there's a reason to show up because you think, I know this person's going to be there, so it will be worth my time. And I agree, there are certain things about the the Zoom or the online meeting, it takes away so much of the logistical concerns, especially with children, because there's so many time things. My kids are in elementary school. I have a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old, and so they can hang out if I'm on a Zoom, but I can't just leave and like they still require care, and sometimes things come up that I need to tend to, but I don't have to leave them at home at night, by themselves, or make sure that my partner will be there, all that kind of thing. So does anybody else have any questions? I'm always hopeful that we get good, engaged folks, and I see some of my great PRC folks that have joined us. So if you have a question, now is a great time to ask it. Although still without too many questions, we ended up at just almost to the hour mark, which I think it speaks to the power of the material, and hopefully this will be something that could be used, I think, in a lot of ways in congregational contexts, either as a weekly formation class or online book discussion, or even a year-long parenting resource. Okay. Well, is there anything you would like to leave us with? I always like to ask our hosts if there are any words of encouragement that they'd like to share with us as we go.
Yeah, I was actually, Susie's so good at these words of encouragement. You're just consistently so great at them. I'll say one small thing and then see if Susie, if you want to add something. I think that just to pick up on something you were saying once we moved into this space, which is how important it is to talk with one another and how hard it is to find time to do that. And I think that for me is another takeaway of this book, that this kind of sense of like our shortcomings, our failures is sort of a huge word, but our shortcomings every day as a parents, and sort of the sense of things we're not quite getting to, we're not doing enough of that. And that's a shared experience. And it's important to, I think, make ourselves vulnerable enough to articulate those sense of regrets and shortcomings ourselves, so that we can be in conversation and sort of caring relationships with other parents who are struggling in the same way. That's been a real gift of this project for me. And I hope that kind of comes through in the writing as well.
Yeah, Ellen, I'd echo that. And thanks for the comment in the chat. I love that idea of having a come when you can kind of invitation that's open, that's invitational rather than kind of demanding. I love that. That's a great idea. It's so hard to summarize what I'd want to say. I want to hear more in a way than I want to say, but I suppose what I'd offer or invite us all into, and I say this to myself as much as to anybody else, is it's so easy to kind of get stuck in stasis as a parent. You just kind of grind through what you need to get done, and there's so much to do at work, at home, at church, and so on, that actually I suppose this is an invitation to do two things. One is to be as gentle as you can on yourself. And I think the second is to be as bold and courageous as you can and try something different. So somehow I hope that in this book, and I hope that I can do more in my life of being both gentle and courageous at the same, being gentle on myself and courageous at the same time. So how can I stretch myself, and how can I take care of myself at the same time? Because I think those two things are really important, and perhaps are the way forward for a sustainable kind of engagement with the world and with parenting and with our work and lives and vocations in all their intersectional richness.
Yeah, fantastic. Wow, being gentle and courageous. I love that. We're grateful for you, Susie, for Ellen. Thank you so much for being with us. We're grateful for this resource. We're thankful for those of you who are able to attend live. And we wish you all days full of peace and purpose. Goodbye, everyone.